Hi, I am Rebecca. I am the psych coach, and today I am going to be talking to you about relationships, not just romantic relationships, but relationships in general. In my experience as a therapist, a huge source of stress and indeed comfort and all the other good stuff, but a huge source of stress is interpersonal conflict. People finding other human relationships challenging. I'm talking about relationships with colleagues, relationships with neighbours, with friends, romantic relationships. They are a huge source of stress, as well as all the other good things that go with them. And there are certain things that you can do within your relationships to try and make them as healthy as possible. There are certain behaviours that aren't conducive to a flourishing relationship, and the one I am going to be talking about today isn't conducive to a flourishing relationship or to your own self-esteem. This behaviour is something you may have been hardwired to do when you were little because that's how it was in your family household, or you may have been hardwired to do it because of previous relationships, or hardwired to do it because of your experience of conflict. But it's a behaviour that in the long run chips away at your confidence and does sabotage the relationships that you've got. What is it that I'm talking about? What I'm talking about is appeasing other people. Never rocking the boat, never speaking your truth because you don't want to upset the other person. Some people in romantic relationships, or if they're living with family members, may describe the sense of feeling as if they're walking on eggshells with someone, constantly feeling like they're treading very carefully to make sure they don't say the wrong thing, to make sure they appease the other person. And that is really tiring. And it's not healthy. Constantly accommodating someone else and never speaking your truth or your desires because you don't want to rock the boat or cause an atmosphere is not a healthy or sustainable way for conducting your relationships. I do understand that there are going to be situations that don't lend themselves to you speaking up. Maybe you've got a neighbour who is occasionally noisy, and you find that quite irritating, but actually they've recently been quite good to you, and really saying something may just cause a bit of an unnecessary issue because actually it's only a couple of times a year and it's not that much of a problem. So I get how you may make a judgment call in that situation that just appeasing someone and tolerating their bad behaviour is actually okay because proportionately it doesn't happen that often. There are redeeming qualities about their relationship or their neighbourliness, and it probably isn't worth the hassle of you saying something. However, maybe you're putting up with a neighbour who's being incredibly noisy a lot of the time. Maybe you're putting up with a partner whose mood swings are really bad and you just simply don't say anything. Maybe you're putting up with a parent who speaks to you really badly, but because you've been conditioned never to speak back to your elders, never to push back, maybe you don't say anything. Think about the times in the relationships where you're appeasing someone else and not rocking the boat. You're not saying something to cause any kind of conflict. How do you feel about those relationships? My guess is you might feel a little bit resentful about them. My guess is they may not be the most enjoyable relationships to experience. And my guess is you walk away often feeling unsatisfied by the interactions you've had with that person. Think about the costs to constantly appeasing someone, constantly meeting their needs, not speaking up because you don't want them to get upset, not speaking up because you don't want them to get frustrated or angry. That's not a way to conduct a relationship. And I know you're not going to pull someone up on all their unhealthy or bad or undesirable behaviours because that's not going to be conducive to a healthy relationship. Neither is it healthy to totally ignore those bad behaviours. Maybe there's something you really, really don't like doing, but that it's expected of you to do. What would it be like to actually speak up and say, I really don't want to do that? Or what would it be like to say, I find it very difficult with you when you're presenting in such a bad mood. What would it be like to say that instead of just biting your tongue, jollying the situation along and doing what you can to sort of smooth things over while there's a big elephant in the room and you know that there's a bad atmosphere? It's not your job to constantly fix a bad atmosphere. It's not your job to constantly bite your tongue. It's not your job to constantly please other people. If you find yourself never wanting to rock the boat, never wanting to speak up, never wanting to assert yourself, then think about how you can change that, because your relationships won't flourish if you are constantly fearful of speaking up and creating an atmosphere. You also need to think about the likelihood of a bad atmosphere being created because you've spoken up. Maybe you're overestimating the catastrophe that would happen if you actually spoke up and didn't engage in so much appeasement of the other person. Maybe your anxious mind is being a little catastrophic and over egging the outcome. You also need to recognise that you can cope with a little bit of conflict, that you can cope with a bit of a bad atmosphere, that you can cope with someone not being really pleased with you. Because ultimately, if you can cope with someone not being pleased with you, it puts you in better stead for speaking up a bit more in other relationships. A relationship whereby it's very calm because you constantly bite your tongue isn't a satisfying relationship. A relationship where you never argue with your partner or your difficult friend purely because you will never speak up isn't the marker of a healthy relationship. Really consider the relationships you've got, how able you feel to speak up in them, and if you don't, think about what you can do to change that. Constantly appeasing someone in a relationship, whether it's a colleague or a neighbour, a friend or a romantic partner, is not a healthy way to be conducting relationships. Have a think about the behaviours you can change, and maybe you can start focusing on one relationship in particular where you would like to change, and just challenge yourself to not appease the other person in a way you would normally, just on one occasion, and see how you feel. If it makes it more likely that you will do it, perhaps you can share your commitment of what you're going to do with a friend and they can hold you accountable. Maybe you'll need a bit of emotional support after you've not gone along with someone else's desires as much as you would normally. Maybe you'll need some emotional support because you'll feel guilty because it's challenged you a little bit to behave in a way you wouldn't normally. And that's a good thing, because a lot of the time, you know, we develop and learn when we're sat on the edge of our discomfort and we push ourselves a little bit. But maybe you need some emotional support. So perhaps you can enlist the support of a friend or a therapist, someone who you confide in, or maybe you just rather do it yourself. But hold yourself accountable and challenge yourself to not just placate someone else in a particular relationship that you're finding challenging. See how you get on. If you've enjoyed today's video, please do hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and I will give you plenty more tips on how you can use psychology on a day-to-day basis.